Welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, a podcast from Aberdeen discussing the latest trends to keep you and your business at the top of your class. And now, here's your host, Aberdeen's CMO in residence, Matthew Grant.
Hello, and welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, the podcast that focuses on the ways that organizations just like yours are using data to make their business more intelligent. I'm your host, Matthew Grant, CMO in residence here at Aberdeen. This week on the show, we're speaking with Steve Murphy, CEO of Epicor. Epicor produces industry-specific business software designed around the needs of manufacturing, distribution, retail, and services organizations. And we invited Steve to the show to talk about the role this software can play as part of companies' digital core. Let's dive in. So, Steve, welcome to the Intelligent Business Show.
Hey, Matt, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me on.
I know, I'm so glad you could make it. So let's just dive right into this. So the point of our show is that we're talking about all the different ways that companies are trying to make their organizations more intelligent. And when you think about it, companies need some kind of platform that's going to enable this enterprise-wide intelligence. So I think it's the launching point for our conversation. Why are ERP solutions perfectly positioned to be that platform? And I think for those listeners who don't know what ERP is, feel free to explain a little bit about what enterprise resource planning is all about.
Hey, great question. I'll make a quick comment on what the ERP system is, and then talk about why I think continues to be in a good position to help with decision support and real-time decision making. So enterprise resource planning, typically somebody who's got an asset, it could be a factory, a store, a fleet of trucks, a warehouse, a business that has to control the flow of goods and services. It's the information backbone that's hooked into typically whatever the most complex information is. It could be product data, it could be customer data, it could be the way a manufacturing plant is scheduled or runs. So when you think about the really complicated big sets of data that need to be clearly understood by the system, the ERP is already dialed into those sources of information, and which kind of leads into the second part of your question, which is why is it well positioned to help you be a more intelligent enterprise? I think it's mostly because that backbone is already connected in something close to real time to those complicated pieces of data, and it renders it up to the user, whoever it is, in an intuitive way. I mean, if you're used to using Facebook or LinkedIn, you can probably use an ERP system nowadays, given the way they're designed.
So in that front, because I think of ERP as real back office kind of nitty gritty stuff, but from what you're saying is from an interface standpoint, it's actually, you have to assume, I guess enterprise technology has to actually meet the user expectations of people who are using technology on a daily basis. So that's why it's kind of like Facebook?
Yeah, well said. And the way I would describe it, to build on what you just said, is you got to meet the user where they're at. And if you can assume, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, if it serves up a page that has a dashboard or dials and buttons, so long as the heuristics behind it do what you expect them to do with inventory or trucks or routing, then it's doing its job. So yeah, it meets them where they're at from a user interface perspective. And that's a newer thing. That wasn't the case 20 years ago. Yeah,
where I felt like you had to have, if you were going to have a ERP system, you had to have someone trained to run it, not just someone who could. I mean, it's not like, I'm sure there are things you have to learn. They're not 100% intuitive. But yeah. I feel like interfaces now have become sort of normalized because we're using them all the time.
Yeah, you're correct. I think that's a big part of the biggest change, one of the biggest changes in why they're becoming more useful, because they weren't always that useful. To your earlier point, 20 years ago, if it looked like you were inside what we would call like an access database where, hey, I got to know how to code to get this thing to do anything, or write in some arcane, set of steps that make no sense, people just would turn the thing off and not use it.
Yeah, no, I mean, well, I'm old enough to remember when using a word processing program, you had to actually put in markup if you wanted things to be bold or italicized. So I love the GUI interface. So I'm curious, when you had said that ERP is the information backbone, because one of the things that I've noticed with ERP companies is that it feels like, on the one hand, like I said, I think of ERP as sort of hardcore. I've got to manage my supply chain. I've got to manage factories or whatever. But it feels to me like ERP has started absorbing or assimilating more and more functions. And the two obvious ones that aren't exactly like you wouldn't think of them as industrial per se, are human capital management and the HR functions. And also even now CRM and some of the sales functions, because of course, if you want to plan for the enterprise and knowing what's happening on the sales front is like critical data and things like that. Is ERP marching to become the enterprise software system?
Yeah, it does appear to be the case. And I would strongly agree that whether it's HCM or CRM, some people might have predicted ERP would become part of that, but that has not been the case. They've drifted back or become integrated into the ERP system. And I think the core issue is the complexity of, for instance, a product. Most customers are product-centric or customer-centric. And the data around the product master, it would be like a complicated Excel spreadsheet for every product or customer, does reside in the ERP system. And that's the toughest thing to take and push into anything else. So you kind of take whatever else is out there and have APIs or connected back to ERP for that reason. That may be the biggest reason why it's happened, but I don't think the trend's going to reverse. I do think that CRM and HCM will continue to become morphed into, somewhat seamlessly the ERP system.
No. It makes sense that the information ends up flowing in that direction. So talking about the information component now, I think one of the things that I know ERP systems are used for are forecasting. I mean, it's built into it in terms of this like planning component of the solution. And now, again, with AI and machine learning and things like that, so kind of getting so hyped nowadays, there's a notion with forecasting that it needs to border on prediction almost. So I'm just wondering, how does ERP help, or what in terms of the current state of ERPs or even Epicor solution? How do you get there? What are things? Maybe I need to phrase it a slightly different way. Is that really possible? And are ERP solutions actually moving more and more from just a planning to a predicting sort of role?
I think they are becoming more predictive. They are more predictive, I guess that'd be fair to say. Obviously, nobody, myself included, has a crystal ball, but what the ERP system has is it has very fine granularity around historical data. And you can slice it. It's smart enough to slice it a lot of different ways. So for instance, you could say, hey, I really would like to know not just how many Tesla Model S's I'm going to sell in Austin next month. How many am I going to sell that are configured for the 260-mile battery pack that are yellow or green or whatever it is? And you can slice the data because of the way it's organized to give you a better chance at accurate predicting by looking at what has happened with that subset at that level of detail. So I think the ERP system, back to that data question of why everything's drifting towards ERP, has data that can be looked at historically in a way and in somewhat close to real time where you can make better predictions. And then, say, Steve or Matt look at it and say, well, you know what, that happened because somebody bought a fleet of 10 green cars, and that's just not right. And then the last step in the process is you can apply judgment to it. You can say, okay, great, thanks for the data from the ERP system. This is actually an anomaly, and I think we're only going to sell 6. So I think that it's becoming much more predictive. And versus 10, 20 years ago, the data is almost real time, and the ease within which you can get a view of the data in the form you want has gotten much better in the last few years, just as far as how the code's written, how fast it reacts, lack of latency, things like that.
Right. So there's a couple of questions I had there. So first of all, I think it makes sense what you're saying in terms of to the extent that it can become predictive and really guide your actions, you're going to need more data. And the more data you have, the better that's going to be. And so pulling in all these other relevant data sources, it's going to be critical to that. But what you just said about kind of getting information out of the system and the ease with which that happens. So before you said, you had to know actual coding language or something if you were actually going to get the system to do what you wanted it to do. Is it true now in order to get these kind of reports or get the system to do what you want, you don't need that kind of specialized knowledge?
You don't. We have our retail product, Eagle Retail Cloud. Not going to try to sell anybody. It's a great product, but the point I'm going to make is the user interface. If you looked at it, if we did a demo for you, you'd say, wow, this really looks like I'm looking at dials, switches, and buttons, and literally you can point and click and go color, which car or vehicle. Well, I actually want to know the Honda Accord, which trim level, LX. If you've been on TrueCar or any of these websites, and you wanted to do something forecasting wise for that vehicle, that's what it looks like. So if you're a recent user of the internet, you could probably use it. And I think most people are. Now, not everybody, but most people in the workforce are. And I think that's the model that our development groups, the engineers, have taken, is let's meet the user where they're at. And the model is going to be, if it's automotive for us, which is a segment, let's look at how TrueCar works, or another interface, and design it to look like that.
Nice. Yes, I have actually used the internet recently, as recently as probably 25 minutes ago. So so maybe I should get into this ERP game. So all right, so the systems, the ERP is becoming the enterprise-wide kind of digital core, as you guys say, of the enterprise. You need a lot of data to actually. The quality and amount of data you have coming in is actually going to impact the performance of the data. You don't necessarily need specialized knowledge or competencies in order to interact with the system and get out of it what you want. So so it sounds magical on some level. But I'm sure it doesn't always work smoothly. So what are the challenges that companies run into when they're actually trying to leverage their ERP solution to make their organizations more intelligent?
Yeah, fair enough. And I think there are two big ones, and one's really related to human nature, and the other's technical. I'll talk about the technical one first. So most ERP systems are horizontal. In other words, someone creates an ERP system that should work for any kind of manufacturing company. And when that's the case, you're probably going to say, well, hey, I make titanium fittings, or I make something really specialized in our business processes different. And some of the data, the fields we collect, as far as metal hardness or tolerance specification for a machining process, you don't have that in your system, so I need to customize it. And that'd be one of the big ones, is if somebody's business requires customization at the level of the database kernel. In other words, think of the Excel spreadsheet. I got to add a column, and there was no column here before for metal hardness. Well, that is kind of tough, and for ERP to work, you may really need that field in there. So some level of customization and understanding the degree of difficulty that's propagated by that customization. That's the first one. The second one would be the desire for people, consensus of the organization, to have everything in the application that they want. In other words, my example would be, hey, everybody, you want cupcakes with pink frosting, we can do that. But if you want sprinkles, I'm going to say you're going to have to live without sprinkles, so that by consensus, you get all the functionality you need, but you don't get every other thing in there that may not be worth the marginal effort functionally to put it in there. So those are the two big issues that I see, and 90+% of the time, it's one or the other. For us, we really focus on industry vertical expertise to deal with the first one, which is if somebody is a manufacturer of a hard asset like an axle assembly or a machine component or a car or something like that, it's very unlikely there's anything they need we don't have. If somebody came and said, hey, I do this thing that you don't do, then I'd say, well, we may not be the company to sell you software because that's not our fit. So I think that's the big one. Customization, if it's not a great fit, and then scope creep, or too much scope that everybody gets what they want, and then the thing collapses because it's too complicated.
Right. No. That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's, again, if you're going to make an all-in-one platform, there's going to be some trade-offs in terms of how it's not going to be generic in a sense, but I assume you're trying to anticipate what are all the needs for the middle part of the curve. And if I create something that meets their needs, maybe a couple deviations from the mean, I might not be able to help them, but that's just you have to run a business. You can't be everything to everybody. But I'm wondering, right, but I'm wondering too, so we were talking before about CRM and HCM and some of these other kind of what may at one time felt like peripheral systems with regards to ERP, which are now getting more and more integrated into it. Is that another complication that companies might have? Okay, we got an Epicor system or whoever, we have this in place, but we're still using a slightly different supply chain management solution, or we already have ADP or somebody who's helping us with our payroll and that kind of stuff. So are there also, since we were talking before about the importance of like quantity and quality of data you're getting in, are there integration challenges with existing point solutions that also can come up?
Yeah, there are definitely. I mean, you might have somebody that says, "Hey, I'd like to be able to refresh labor rates for a rate card in a faraway country in real time." In other words, the HCM system, the people system says, "We just hired a new batch of consultants, and we're paying them more, and they're going to be deployed to the Far East and these different places." And I'd like to know that the system knows that immediately, so that when I scope out a project to deliver, whether it's a product or a service, it's accurate.
Yep.
So there's some integration required there. And then you could say the same thing, whether it's human capital management or people out there selling, "Hey, this customer, they've changed. Who is the decision maker?" And I'd like that to be reflected back in the ERP system so that the sales cycle is efficient. So there's some degree of integration, and we certainly will do that, depending on what the customer wants.
Right. Though I assume for companies like yours, then there is another solution where you say, "Hey, we do now have a new component or some other piece that can replace your existing thing that has the benefit of integrating into what now you've already got."
We do, although if somebody's, for instance, running a CRM system they're really happy with, it's not as if I'd say, "Hey, we've got a better one," but what we have is a highly let me put it this way. I haven't seen in the last couple of years here an integration to any CRM system where I wasn't like, "Hey, we've done it before." I've gotten from point A to point B. We don't get stumped on that.
Right.
We scope it out, and there's some really smart people that work on it, but it's rare that those projects wouldn't get done on time.
Right. So, all right. So another question that I had to do with, like I said, and we were kind of talking about at the beginning, that ERP systems are traditionally feel very back office down, kind of in the weeds. But you've been talking a little bit about with this interface and things like that, it's much more user-friendly across the enterprise. And I think people, and I've seen this also with some other budgeting and planning, kind of financial software people we've talked to before, there's this notion of the back office is going to move up to the front office more. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. I mean, if there's anything else aside from the user interface that's making it so that ERP solutions are becoming more of a front line or front office or even kind of line employee tool.
Yeah, it's happened and it's happening. So I'll give you a couple of examples. We have some really big customers, Ace Hardware and True Value, big retailers of hardware that run on the system, Epicor. And one of the things we'll see will be somebody being able to, in real time with the customer across the counter, say, "Hey, you just bought a gas barbecue." The system will prompt them to say, "Do you need a propane tank?"
Right.
And they'll be, "Yeah, I do." But it's smart enough to say, you bought a gas barbecue. It's not going to tell them you need a can of lighter fluid because you don't, but because it knows it's gas, right? There's a lookup table that can compare values and things like that. Or you could have somebody at a distributor that's able to commit to an appointment. The system says, you can't deliver this by 2, but you could do it by 2:30. And on the phone, they're like, "Well, we could have it at your house by 2:30. So the back system knows enough about distances and GPS and availability of the product and historical performance for the delivery truck to say, you can commit to this, but don't commit to that. So there's definitely, it's making employees make better decisions and look smarter by pushing a piece of valuable information that's been filtered for what that person's role or privilege is. It's not giving them something they don't need. It's giving them something that might be of use. And they can decide whether they want to use that information or not. They can just ignore it too.
Right. That's an interesting thing. And actually, I wasn't actually thinking of that use case in the sense that when the person at Ace or whatever, the distributor, whoever's doing scheduling, they're not, or particularly I think the cashier or a sales person on the floor, they're not thinking, "I'm interacting with our company's great ERP solution," right? The ERP solution is providing them and prompting them with information that's actually useful to them. Yep. So it becomes kind of seamless on that front. So it's interesting. I think when I first posed the question, I was thinking, I don't know, I was thinking more like, okay, so people are digging into this and they're calling up their own reports or whatever. But instead, you're leveraging the ERP system to be intelligent and help and a kind of augment the intelligence of the people on the front line. In a sense, it sounds like also even for better, obviously you get more revenue if it's, do you want fries with that? But it's also better for customer experience, I imagine.
Yeah, that's right. And the trick is for us, we have to be really choosy for our customers around what tidbit of information gets served up, because human beings are very adaptable. If it's giving you too much information you don't want, you just ignore that feature immediately. But if every once in a while it provides you a piece of information that's actually useful, you'll probably almost always look at it. So I think that's the trick for us, is be very choiceful about what it is that we think is of value to the person at the counter, and don't overdo it.
Right. And so, which brings me back to also something I was also thinking about in terms of the rise, especially over the last 10 years, and especially as we've moved into this, weird way, kind of software-defined reality, where UX has become so critical. And so that's where it sounds like, that's been a focus for Epicor. This has to be usable for people, and not just usable, but in what we were just talking about, useful. It actually helps them do their jobs better. And that also then ends up spilling over into customer experience for their customers, right? Because it's better for them. So is that part of when you guys are thinking about your product and product strategy, or are those the kinds of conversations that happen at Epicor around UX and CX, and we need to be optimizing for these things?
Yeah, you nailed it. We use the word usability, and everything from focus groups of like, how do you like this versus that? Would you like this dial to look? And human beings have different reactions to how usable something looks. And I'm not a great, I'll speak for myself, I'm not a great member of these focus groups because I've been immersed in this stuff for too long. But when you get a group of people who do something else for a living to look at this stuff, it's fascinating what they find usable and what they don't. And it's not always what we expected.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think that's almost like usability 101. You're not you're not the user of your product,
It's exactly, it's true.
And it's something you can only see how other people see it if you let other people actually see it and interact with it. And I know from being involved in product stuff in the past, it's not always easy to hear what the people are saying, or something that you thought was so obvious is like, what is that? Or I don't care about that.
Yeah.
No.
It can be painful, but it's necessary, that's for sure.
Right. So we're kind of rounding the bend here into the towards the end here of the podcast, but I did want to ask, because I was, since I have you on the phone, so to speak, you're the CEO of a pretty big company. I mean, 20,000 customers, over 150 countries. 3,900, if I can trust Wikipedia, 4,000 employees, whatever it is. And you're the CEO. You have to make all the calls. So how does this ERP and this planning and being data-driven, how do you do it? And I'm assuming you probably maybe use ERP solutions, but but how do you manage all this data so that you can actually feel like you're being effective and actually running a business intelligently?
Yep, a good, fair question. And we do use an ERP system, and it is Epicor, but as you might suspect. But it does require, given the scope you talked about, and that's all accurate. About 4,000 employees, 20,000 customers, over 100 countries. For me personally, there's been some trial and error. It's my first CEO job, and I'm about 2 years into it. But there's been some trial and error around how much detail I need and don't need in reporting. And I've tried to put some work into, back to the focus group, with the folks I work with and that are on my staff, how much, as far as information that's readily available and accurate, how quickly can I get one of these reports, and how much do I need to know? That's a bigger question, because you have to empower people to make decisions. If you're getting too much detail, you could be the CEO that's bothering people and making them less productive. So I've kind of gone from probably the first 6 months on the job, too much detail, way too far down in the weeds, to maybe step back quite a bit. And I've kind of zeroed in on a weekly or monthly cadence with 4 or 5 different reports that talk about customers and product, mostly customers and product. That's it. And then there are a few other things along the lines of the quarterly, finances, but we've got a CFO and we've got, banks that cover us and things like that for our debt. So I'm very involved in that every 90 days. But as far as week to week, day to day, month to month, a couple of really clear views I've worked with the folks on to make sure that I know enough to know when to get involved, which isn't that often these days, because people are really, good people are doing their jobs. But that's it. And it gets pulled right out of the ERP system, as you might suspect. And I guess the other thing I'd say is it is really useful if you can get to where you pull it right out of the system, because it doesn't create a bunch of manual work or workarounds or customization. And that's good for productivity.
Yeah, no, I imagine. So I'm just curious then, since you are relatively new to this, though 2 years, a year and a half or so is not nothing. So what were there any things where you were surprised how little information you needed in order to make a call, and other ones where you thought you wouldn't need as much information, but as it turns out, you need a lot more than you thought to really feel like good about your decision?
Yeah. Great question. I think that for me, because of I've done a lot of different things. I've been a design engineer. I've been a sales leader. I've worked on SAP implementations. I've done a bunch of different stuff in different parts of my career. I think when it came to evaluating and qualifying deals and sales cycles, I probably brought with me a lot of good skill around that. Didn't need a lot of reports. A lot of that's body language.
Right.
Talking to the sales team and really, being present in the moment, saying, "Hey, this is a deal we can win. Let's get after it." Or, "Well, we'll never win this one. Let's walk away."
Right.
I think where I probably needed a lot more information, and I've got cooperative teams that have helped me, would be on product development and understanding. The big question for me often is, "Hey, we're spending a lot of money to bring this product to market. Is there a market for the product, or did we just think it was a great idea a while ago and we never gave up on it?" Or to your earlier point, it would be painful to say nobody wants this thing.
Yeah, right.
That was an area where the reporting, I wasn't getting the reports I needed, and worked with some people, and I get them now.
No. And I can see that, though. Yeah, especially, as I understand Epicor's growth too, which, it has had over the years. The company's been around for a long time. There's been a lot of acquisition and things like that that goes on. So making those product calls when maybe it didn't even necessarily originate within the organization could be super challenging. So, I think that's about all the time we have today. I guess the one thing I wanted to say, it sounds like you're having a lot of fun and really enjoy what you're doing. So I just want to know, is that all a front, or do you really genuinely enjoy being a CEO?
It's a great job. I think that I really like it. And I think that occasionally, I got 3 teenage kids. I tell them, if you really learn what you like and don't like, and you take some risks along the way with your career, you can end up with a job you really like. It really is a great fit. But you probably will have to, I had to leave a couple of jobs that paid really well that I didn't like as much, but you got to maybe do that a couple of times to get to one you really like.
True. All right, Steve. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Intelligent Business Show.
Hey, Matt, it was a pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Next week, we'll be talking with Pete Gillette of Zuant about mobile data capture, trade shows, and personalizing interactions at the booth. See you then.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Intelligent Business Show. You can find this show on iTunes and Spotify, as well as on YouTube. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at Aberdeen_show. And if you want to know what's going on in your market space, be sure to check out Aberdeen.com.